in a globalized world that's full of complexity, it's one thing to become a expressed and well-defined leader in one organization, government, nation, but we are still in competition often. And how do you deal in a complex environment where there's multiple leaders? Todd, what's your take on that?
So I think that has become more complex for many of the reasons that we talked about here, in that everybody sees themselves as a leader now, okay, because there's so many facets in which you can communicate your views and so forth. I don't know that I have an answer, but I can tell you how I approach it, which is I try, and I'm not always successful, but I try to sit back in those occasions and listen to the other leaders and then plot a course, and try to. The goal here is that if you're trying to lead to a solution of something, the goal then is to co-opt as many of those leaders into a common, framework as possible. And so that means you're going to have to compromise your views. You're going to have to bring them towards you. And you're going to have to do it in a very fast-paced situation, because most of the time these are in, quick, hastily put together kinds of environments where you got to arrive at a decision. You got a bunch of people together, whether it be at the G20 or whatever it is, or even NATO summit. You only have a limited amount of time, and you got to move quickly. So I think it's being able to scope it out and not being the loudest one, not being the guy that walks up and takes the shorter person and sets them aside so that you can get in front of the picture.
Oh, I don't know who you're talking. Actually, I think you're onto something. And if I can expand on your concept of a frame, I think we've got a bunch of frameworks in place. If it's the Geneva Convention or the UN Manifesto, or I think there's a certain decorum. I think you said it very well. I think it's important in the sense of transparency to know who your foes are and what your foes are all about. But I'm going to go a step further. I think we would do good. I think we could eliminate a lot of this perception of foe if we understood that. I think a lot of the conflict in the world is based on the misunderstanding of that we are in conflict. I think there's a lot of situations of conflict that are propagated that are only conflict because we have an emotional reaction to them. I think there's in a lot of cases there's common ground. And if we go back to the concept of American exceptionalism, I think one of the things that we've always propagated is that there's certain rules by which you play, and that we're competitive, and may the best man win. I think in particular, I've had the short privilege of doing a little bit of work for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and I had the privilege of being in a project in Nigeria. I think Africa and South America are two continents which are incredibly fascinating.
Yes.
Where we have a terrible tradition, European and also otherwise, of colonialism, and I think there's a new form of colonialism that's coming about that's more ingratiating, the Chinese form of it. I think there's some issues there as well, but it's more ingratiating. It's more give and take. I think if I were to answer your question, Rico, I think what leadership needs to do is have a new paradigm. It's good to stand for your own nation and your own interest, and it's okay to endorse competition, and to stand up against foes if they're foes, but also to have certain rules of behavior. We don't cheat. We don't steal from each other. We don't set the smaller one aside. If a nation has a democratic process, we need to endorse it, whether it becomes our personal economic interests.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about the American military actually being the extension of the American economy. I think in some cases there might be a small form of legitimacy there, but some of it is misguided to our own personal disadvantage, midterm, long term.
Yeah.